This week's podcast episode was originally broadcast in November 2025 during our Social Talent Live webinar. If you missed this free event when it was broadcasted live, be sure to sign up for the next one over on socialtalent.com/live.
And moving on, I am really excited to introduce the next segment, focusing on the data behind this efficiency. As I mentioned, we have a unique perspective joining us in Tyler Weeks. Tyler is the Managing VP of People Technology Research and Analytics at Marriott. And Tyler isn't a typical TA person. His background is in physics. He's got a PhD in physics and data science, worked for Intel as a physicist there, and ended up getting into the recruiting and HR world, moving to the vendor side, and now most recently with Marriott. He gets to look at really serious scale and background. Tyler, I've had the pleasure of hearing him present in person over the last few days. He's in a hotel room, maybe 2 blocks from me at the moment as we reside before he goes to the airport. Thank you for joining us, Tyler. I know you've been on calls for several hours. Maybe if you don't mind introducing yourself, tell us a little bit about that background. What brought you into this space? And maybe could you give context to your role, as maybe it might not be quite obvious to our audience as to why would you have a perspective on TA ops? You might describe a little bit about that scale.
Yeah, totally. So, it's funny because I was, happy in my world doing research, and I got this idea in my head that I wanted to solve business problems, but I didn't even know what that meant. And through a friend of a friend, I ended up in a role in TA, not doing anything technical. And I thought it might be the biggest mistake of my life. I was like, what have I done? And it blew my mind. It was so complex. The problems were really fascinating. The people that we dealt with really wanted to kind of understand what the strategy was, how we were going to solve problems. We were filling roles for Intel's fabs worldwide. And I sort of fell in love with the problem. Like, just talent became this thing, and people are crazy. Like, I understand plasmas and chemical interactions and, Newton's laws, thermodynamics, all that. But God, people are just nuts, which makes it a really fun problem to tackle. So I've been in the space about 10 years now, and I'm not going back.
I had someone say to me recently, recruiting, it's not rocket science. I was like, yes, it's not. Rocket science obeys the laws of physics. It's binary. You can learn that. People are just a mess. We do complicated things for no reason. I'll take rocket science any day of the week in terms of a simpler job.
Yeah.
But Tyler, I'm sure most of our audience are going to know Marriott, and Marriott, not Marriott, just for the US audience, which you taught me this week. Tell me about just the scale of Marriott in terms of the employees you support, and maybe into the nitty-gritty of your current role in terms of that tech stack and reporting stack for HR.
Yeah, I mean, we're huge. It's part of the reason I've been with the company about 3.5 years now, and part of what lured me here was the scale. It's enormous. So we've got about 420,000 of our own employees worldwide. We're in about 140 countries. We've got 40 brands. It's wildly complex. Just to issue a survey to our employees in the US, I think we've got to translate into 40 or 50 languages. So huge frontline workforce. I mean, that's only half of our business. If you go and you look at the franchise side, there's closer to about 1 million people wearing a Marriott badge somewhere in the world. So there's not a world event. There is not a natural disaster, political unrest that doesn't impact one of our employees. Mm-hmm. So when you go try to kind of sum that up, you're kind of trying to summarize the world. It's like really hard to describe what it's like to be an associate at Marriott. It's also a really fun problem. So one thing I'll say that, I don't know why. So we're the largest hotel company in the world. But the thing that makes it actually sound bigger to me is that we're the 4th largest restaurant chain in the world. Most people don't understand that or sort of appreciate that. Just think about how many restaurants are in hotels. It's huge. We have more Michelin stars than any other company in the world, which it's kind of crazy. So my team, we look after all of the HR, technology, globally. So our HCM, ATS, all of the tools that we put out for our HR teams worldwide, as well as that our associates interact with, both from all the way from open enrollment to got to reset my password to a problem with my pay stub. And then we also within my team we have all of research and analytics. So really trying to understand what it's like to be here. We do really care. We've got we're almost 100 years old, have a deep cultural value in the company about taking care of our associates and taking care of our guests. And so we want our associates to feel taken care of anytime they interact with us, no matter if it's through a bot or through a website or they got a hold of somebody on the HR team. So we really dive into kind of all the information we have available. And that starts kind of when they're applying for a job all the way until, they've had a wonderful 40-year career with us and they choose to go do something more relaxing. So, yeah.
Well, as you saw from the survey, for the 75% of folks on the call who already have a TA ops function, the number one role of that function is managing that tech stack and understanding that tech stack. Mm-hmm. You get to see beyond the TA's tech stack. How important do you think it is to see the context of TA and technology in a wider view of HR across an organization? What kind of insight can you bring to the team who currently maybe only manage the TA part of it to think about, well, how does that interact with the overall HR tech stack?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really important is it's not even just within HR, but just kind of the relationship between TA, tech, and finance. Just how you're planning for headcount, when and how your managers are getting approval to hire has a huge impact on their expectations coming into the process, right? So, if you're having hiring managers that are frustrated and mad at you before you've even opened the rec, it's probably because they got approval and it took another 6 weeks of back and forth with their manager and HR and finance to finally get the rec, in the ATS and started. So you're like already behind and it's not your fault, right? Like, so that relationship between that system and however you're doing those approvals, huge piece of the success of the business. And then, I think onboarding is often this kind of like hot potato that sort of gets thrown to, like, everyone's kind of like, not it. That's a really big piece. I mean, like I think everybody deals with no-shows or sort of like what we have a term for it called quick quits, where they like accepted a job, got all the way through offer, and either they don't show up on the first day or they show up once and then never come back. More of a frontline worker challenge, but really, I think understanding that your pipeline goes all the way up into kind of I wouldn't end it at offer or even start, but like all the way up into their onboarding. And we're really trying to kind of get smarter about how we think about it as like one experience, right? Like I want you, as you're going through the hiring process, to feel taken care of. I want you to start to kind of feel that culture, and that should come through in every experience you have with our technology.
You mentioned, yesterday we had a big conversation on a panel around AI usage in recruiting. A lot of the folks in this call are under pressure to review or think about AI in the recruiting process. You shared a perspective from Marriott's, 100-year culture on experience that is going to inform your decisions. So would you mind sharing that with the audience just to let us know how you think about, automation of processes and things like TA?
Yeah, look, I mean, like, I think the reality is that automation isn't by default better, right? It might be faster, but it's not necessarily better. And, we do, like I said, it's really important for us that our associates feel taken care of. That's the operable word. And so as you're thinking about automation, as you're thinking about like, chatbots in particular, making sure that they've got the right tone and they match your company I think that's the magic trick, right? Like if people go in and it feels like your company, I don't know, maybe you're a software company or you specialize in automation, then Maybe you do want something that looks and feels kind of like your product. For us, we want it to look and feel like our product, like you're engaging with the front desk. And so that's going to inform everything we're doing. And we're really like, that means that we need a seamless experience. We don't want to have 27 bots in Teams or sort of like distinct functions that you got to figure out which one of them to talk to. We want to have kind of one that you walk in. We take on the work of figuring out what function you needed just by the way you ask the question. So,
I love that.
Yeah.
The other big part of your role, and you mentioned, is the data side and the analytics.
Right.
And for a lot of folks, particularly who come to TA Ops and come to recruiting, we're not taught enough about data science. I heard Stephen Lovett on a podcast talking about the fact that we learn all this stuff in math in school. It's just never useful, and we don't learn about statistics, and we don't learn about data management. We should learn that in school. I know you're a big fan of understanding just how data works, and you shared some insight around a key metric that a lot of us use and how we're often wrong, which is kind of time to hire, and your thoughts about how you look at data. Would you mind sharing just your thoughts on just as you said yesterday, the sciencey bit that maybe we all get wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just say before I answer that question, if you're a recruiter or a recruiting team and you're looking to influence people using data, I think there's a mistake that we make when teams like mine come to teams like yours and we're like, we're going to do data literacy or data storytelling. And we make it seem like you need a lot of data to tell a data story. And that is the exact wrong direction. The way I would think about it is think of data like punctuation. It comes at the end of a complete thought, right? So tell a story and have one thing that kind of like punctuates that story. If you string a bunch of punctuation together, that's just like a swear word in comic book, right? And that's kind of what people tend to do is they get more bar charts means more convincing. And it is actually kind of the opposite. So that would be my advice to you, go against that intuition to just add more and more data, thinking that's what you need to tell a data story. The story piece is the important part. So with that, so when you're thinking about time, there's a mistake that we all make when we first come into TA where we say things like time to fill, and we're taking the average of all the time it took. The problem is that like average is describing a normal curve or a bell curve, which is symmetric. So like the average be the middle of that hump, right? So what you're saying when you think you're saying when you say that is, oh, this is the typical experience. But the thing is if you've ever gone in and looked at time to fill, what you'll see is that one, you never have negative time, right? So it's not symmetric. And you'll have a ton of recs that get filled in like less than a day. Like you have this huge amount that get filled super quick. And you have this long tail of recs that get filled over like sometimes 2 years. It's like, how did that happen? But it did. So just doing a quick thought experiment, right? If you've got a rec that was filled in 0 days and you have one rec that was filled in 3 years, the average of those is 1.5 years. That does not mean anybody experienced a 1.5 year time to fill, right? Like it's a little bit of an illusion. So the way I recommend thinking about time when you're talking about TA metrics is the way you talk about traffic. Like if you've got to drive to work and somebody asks you, how long does that take? You will say things like, typically, it takes me about 30 minutes. We call that the 80% rule. So instead of looking at the average of all the time, look at what time did it take for 80% of your candidates to get through, or for whatever metric you're looking at. It'll give you something that's a little bit more intuitive and something that you can kind of talk about. And you don't need to go solve for the stuff above the 80% because there's always going to be a reason that a rec was open. Like maybe, you've got like exec search or hard to fill roles, or maybe there's roles that you need or want to do a longer search on. And it's not really fruitful to go like try to close those faster if the market doesn't support that, right? So you really focus on that 80%. What's the typical time to get to work, right?
I love that. I love that. I've had my same experience in looking for, in our organization, just looking in sales teams in time to sell. We actually kind of look at the data, not the average. You see the real stories there. But you also have, some really good, strong opinions on metrics we perhaps don't traditionally measure that we should perhaps be looking at. Alternative TA metrics. We've had a couple of questions in already from folks on that. And by the way, just before we go on that, I'd love to just put this one, which is from Emmanuel, and thumbed up by a lot of people. And that's one of the best things I've ever heard about storytelling with data. So that's a nice one. That's new for me. I think the message made a lot of sense. So what are we not measuring that you measure and you think perhaps others could think about adopting as new TA metrics, and why?
One of the ones that I really like is time to respond. And I think it's because it's starting from the expectation of the candidate. So this is a candidate-focused one of they've applied to the job. How long did it take before they heard something meaningful from you? Not just an automated thank you for your application, but they were either dispositioned, invited to an interview, moved to a next step. Like they got a meaningful communication from you. The reason I like this one is because it starts to capture sort of the bulk of your experience, not just the experience of the one person that got hired. And that's kind of one of the problems with a lot of TA, like traditional TA metrics, is they focus on the one hire and that person's experience. And so they may have had an amazing experience. I mean, maybe you might be quoting, like, I don't know if you do, if folks here do like high volume hiring. In those cases, you might have a 2-week time to fill. If you're doing more like technical roles or more senior roles, it's probably more like 40 days or so, 40 to 50 days. That's for that person. When I've gone and looked at this, what I have found is that like where we had 42 days for time to fill, our time to respond was more like 55 days. And I think there's some like realities to like why that happens. Recruiters tend to kind of hold on to candidates until the rec is closed and the job is filled, and then they disposition folks. But what that means is that the bulk, even if you had like, you were setting the standard on time to fill and the experience of the person you hired, you are blind to how terrible of experience you're giving to most people. And that's the real measure of your process. So it's one I love, and it's a fairly simple one to start to it takes a little bit of massaging because you don't have like one clean signal for when to stop the clock. When they applied, and then you kind of have to collect a set of things and go, okay, for our company and our process, these are the forms of communication that they would get. So like how long did it take for most people to hear from us?
So if I could, I love this because it's much more experience focused, right? Which is more the reality of, and especially in a consumer brand like Marriott, it's what the majority of people who walk in your door, who ever apply for a job, will experience, and you should be measuring. There's one more, by the way, that I'd love to just explore before we go, because we're out of time already. Can you believe
it? Okay,
yeah. But you took a sports metric and you applied it to recruiting to understand the impact of different roles within, let's say, a more scale recruiting team. Would you mind quickly sharing that data?
Yeah, I'll go super fast because I know you got some great guests after me. So, one of the things that pretty much across sports that has become popular over the last, couple decades are impact ratings. So rather than just like how many points somebody scored or how many steals they got or what their individual contribution is, it looks at their impact on the game. So in basketball, they call this a plus minus rating. Soccer's got one. Football. They've all got one. You can do this with recruiting teams. And this is really helpful for looking beyond just the recruiter and looking at like the real impact of like a sourcer or a coordinator on the experience or the process. So you could take a thing like if you've got a satisfaction rating from hiring managers, look at those ratings with and without that coordinator or with and without that sourcer, instead of just looking at the number of candidates they sourced or whether their candidate got hired in the process. That's fine. I mean, you should kind of measure that they are pulling in good candidates, but like, it doesn't really tell you the full story of what they're doing for that. Because like a great sourcer and or a great coordinator can really enhance like the experience for the hiring manager. And you could do a similar thing with like candidate experience surveys. You could do it with even ratios, like conversion ratios from like interview to offer stuff like that. You could look at like how this person impacts the experience, and it's just a great way to kind of get more of the team credit for their contribution.
I love that, Tyler. I'm sorry, just as with Molly, we don't have more time. I think the audience have more questions for you. If you do have a couple of minutes, it'd be great if you could jump into the chat and answer them. But really appreciate you taking the time out this morning to join us before you fly back to Oregon and share some of those insights. It's great having you here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Johnny. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.